what a year 2024 has been. It just keeps getting interesting. I mean, I guess that's the good thing I'm going to take away from 2024. We do not live in boring times. Very interesting times that we live in. There's been so much to talk about. Escalating war. There's been all kinds of calamities, natural and otherwise. There's been sickness that just seems to linger for weeks upon end. My own family being suffering from that. And then, of course, we have, all religions arrive at God somehow by Pope Francis. Fiducia supplicans, lest we forget about the global pushback against fiducia supplicans. There's been assassination attempts against Donald Trump. He won the election. Everybody was surprised, including myself. So there's so much to talk about. I've invited the crew over at Catholic Unscripted to be on the team. Katherine Bennett and Mark Lambert from them are joining us this morning to talk about their take on 2024. Good morning to both of you. Thank you for your time.
Morning, Joe.
Good morning. Thanks for having us.
Praise be to God. So, all right, let's start with you, Katherine. Ladies first. 2024. What's your take on 2024? Good? Was it good? Was it bad? Somewhere in between? And what are your lasting memories of 2024?
Well, just listening to you there reminded me of some things that had kind of gone from my mind. And I think in some ways that's a blessing because it wasn't a great year, really. You just mentioned a number of quite alarming things. And I think overall, looking at the year as a whole, I do think we're on a decline. I'm currently reading, I can't say his name, Czeslaw Miłosz is The Captive Mind. And in it, he talks about the stages by which the mind gives way to compulsion from outside, and how vulnerable we are to that. And I think the COVID years, we can kind of see as almost like a testing ground to see how vulnerable, weak, and easy to manipulate we are. And it turns out we are a lot. And so I think then over this past year, 23 into 24, in the UK, we've had a general election, which has brought in a Labour government. And so in the latter half of the year, we've seen a really sudden change where quite big seismic shifts are being pushed through in terms of education, in terms of the DIE programme, in terms of trying to rush through an assisted suicide bill. So I'm afraid that my take on the year gone by is not a good one in terms of where we're at in our society at the moment. However, I do think that the darker, the lower we go, then I think people will start to see and realise the need for truth, coherence, and light. So where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more, and all that. So, and I've just been looking at this lovely tweet about Pope Benedict XVI on, of course, the second anniversary of his death, saying that 71 years of homilies, innumerable essays, 66 books, 3 encyclicals, 4 exhortations, all came down to the last 4 words at the hour of his death: I love you, Jesus. And I think we have to remember that with all the complications, with all the incoherence, with all the chaos, we have Christ, we have the sacraments, we keep our eyes fixed on him and remain hopeful.
Wow. Well, there's got to be a silver lining in there somewhere. Mark, in your own country, people are arrested for thinking about babies being aborted, praying for them in their minds. So, I mean, where's the silver lining here in 2024, Mark? What do you say?
Well, I've been watching with fascination about the drones. Like, you've been doing brilliant work, sort of trying to figure out where the drones. What is that? That's
the drones.
Madness, isn't it?
I forgot about the drones. It's been such a great news cycle.
Yeah, well, I'm hoping that, like, obviously we've had the sort of onslaught of communism in the UK. I think we're going to reap the rewards from that election here. But I'm hoping very much that election, as you say, it was a pleasant surprise for a lot of people, and I'm hoping that and along with something good from the Vatican, was in April the document Dignitas Infinita, on infinite dignity, which reaffirmed church teaching on, against gender ideology and about human sexuality. And I think that was a really positive thing, even amidst all that. Sometimes we get lost in all the mad rhetoric that's coming out of Rome. So those two things, certainly on social media, I've seen perhaps we've woken up finally to the madness of gender ideology. We've seen that both sides of the Atlantic. Definitely over here, there's been definite action taken to stop the government or the NHS giving children hormone blockers and stuff like that. And obviously Trump's going to give that a boost. I'm just hoping and praying that what Trump does is positive for the world. I'm really hoping that will give us at least a 4-year reprieve, won't it?
It is interesting to sit back and see these things play out. Donald Trump's not even been sworn in, and he's already sending people out around the world to negotiate things, to prepare for that inauguration. So he's almost governing in secret almost. It's a very interesting time we live in. But you mentioned the encyclical a minute ago. But let's talk about Fiducia Supplicans for a second. That started us off in 2024. Very controversial, worldwide pushback. Of course, everybody thinks the African bishops led the way on that, but they weren't the only ones. There were bishops around the world who had to make public statements against Fiducia Supplicans. Katherine, let's go back to you. What were your thoughts looking back on that time about the pushback in particular?
Well, I think it was hopeful. It was quite odd, though. Mark and I did an analysis of Austin Ivory, who is this guy you may be familiar with. Is very behind Pope Francis and has written The Wounded Shepherd about Pope Francis, and he was kind of taking the view, well, the Africans can do their thing because they're African, and essentially they're a little bit behind the times, but we can ignore that and overlook that, but really we can look at progress over here. And it was such a divisive message that I think it must have raised alarm bells with people realizing, hang on, this is a universal church, this is Catholic, one holy Catholic and apostolic church. It's not what's true for you, what's true for me, what's my truth. So I think that the pushback and the strength shown in the face of what really is ambiguity, this ambiguity coming out of Rome has been really, really remarkable and hopeful. And as you say, it wasn't just the African bishops. There were a lot of other good and perhaps previously quiet bishops, priests, clergy who started to speak up. And I think that was encouraging, because some that we thought may be too afraid suddenly found the courage. So that tells us that there is more hope than we might have thought before that occurred.
Yes, I thought the same thing. It was encouraging to see that the consciences of bishops and priests around the world were being awakened, and they had to say something because they knew that this was wrong. Mark, what did you think about that? And one thing that I was disappointed in was the African bishops. They only really complained about half of the problem in Fiducia Supplicans, the homosexual aspect of it. But the divorce and remarriage, they didn't seem to care much about that. They didn't complain at all about that part. I was bothered by that. What about you?
Well, I thought the whole thing was a complete debacle, and I was really disappointed that not more bishops didn't stand up against it, especially some good bishops like, for example, Mark O'Toole over here is the Archbishop of Cardiff, and he immediately put out a really supportive message of it. And you just think, like, what on earth are they doing? It's very much like the bishop who is the Archbishop of Glasgow, you covered yesterday, I think, with that ridiculous cross that they've put up in the cathedral. Why do the bishops do this? What do they think? Do they not read these things? Why did that bishop decide to put up that joke-like cross? It's a betrayal of Christ's sacrifice. And we see this too often. I mean, especially in the UK, I think. You can understand that you've got bishops like Strickland who've been just completely removed because they've spoken out against Pope Francis. So you can see the sort of, South American dictatorship type of papacy that is set up, and that's why everyone's a bit jumpy. But it really makes you worry that this is the way that the bishops have deferred all of their authority to Rome, and that they don't seem to believe or think that they've got any teaching authority of their own. Are they not the pastor of their diocese? Are they, are they not looking after us in any way whatsoever? So I was really disappointed that it was so obviously ridiculous. You had the African church en masse separated itself, basically. How that could not be a complete disaster in everyone's eyes, I just do not understand. It's unprecedented, isn't it? But it's like if Pope Francis literally set light to St. Peter's, I don't think the bishops and cardinals would do anything about it, would they?
They'd probably pop some popcorn and watch. I mean, I also forgot about Luce, the new logo doll, the synodal whatever Jubilee thing going on. I forgot all about that. You reminded me of the cross, and I thought about Luce the doll, and I'm thinking, who is in charge over there? Like, who do they hire in the marketing department to come up with these ideas? These bishops, they're like, okay, whatever, we'll just keep going with it. It's bizarre. Before we go to break, though,
I know a pornographer. Let's get him to do it.
That's right. I forgot it. Yeah, the guy was a pornographer. I forgot all about that. Yeah, bizarre world. Before we go to break, I wanted to bring up France, the Olympics. Notre Dame reopened this year with its ugly Novus Ordo altar to boot. What were your thoughts about the Olympic opening ceremonies, Mark?
We did a video and it went really viral on it, didn't because it was. Well, I thought Jonathan Peugeot was really interesting on the fact that. This is basically now the devil out in the open. That was sort of his take on it. Yeah, of course the devil's going to be pushing it in your face, and it was just the way that the secular culture has embraced what's patently evil and is passing it off now as pastiche or entertainment or something. It was, and of course they're going to direct those attacks at the good, the true, and the beautiful. We really shouldn't be surprised that that's the case. But it was great that there was such a positive backlash against it. I think that was my main takeaway from it. And lots of people were interested in our critique of it, what we had to say about it.
Yeah, so, it was a great video. You guys did a wonderful job. Catherine, what about you? Catherine, we only have about a minute before break here, but what did you think about Notre Dame reopening?
Oh, it was good and bad. It had pluses and minuses. I just have a sense of frustration. You mentioned the loose doll, which I also wiped from my memory. There's so much pap and artificiality and rot, and I just want plain speaking. Mark is wonderful. He's a plain speaker. Let's just call it as it is. This is rotten. This is artificial. This is not good stuff. And instead, I think we're too desperate to say, well, look, there is good in this, and look at this is trying to appeal to Japanese people or there's always some desperate attempt to make it okay. Sometimes it's just not okay.
I almost forgot about Pope Francis, guys, and his derogatory remarks towards homosexuality or homosexual men in seminaries. Remember that story? That was kind of a crazy story. He tends to talk out of both sides of his mouth. 2024 was no exception. Do you recall that one, Catherine?
Yes, I do have some memory of him using an F word, but not the one we're most familiar with. In talking about, and it was quite soon after Fiducia Supplicans. So there's this strange. Mark often uses the phrase he indicates left and turns right. There's this ambiguity, this confusion. On the one hand, he's at pains to be open and compromising almost with who he terms the LGBT community. I think the term itself should be rejected, and then use these offensive words. It's just another mystery as far as I'm concerned. I'm sure Mark's got something to say about it.
Yes. Talk about this sort of duality. We also had the CBS interview. There will be no female deacons. And then we had the Synod on Synodality and the great third year wrap up, which left the whole conversation open for further investigation, further discussion. Well, which is it? Is it no? Is it yes? It's both, apparently. Mark, what do you think?
Well, it's absolutely playbook Peronism, isn't it? This is the direction that he always takes. And part of that Peronistic modus operandi is trying to please everyone. So, and your rhetoric doesn't match up with your actions. And ultimately, there was a cardinal, wish I could remember his name, when he was elected, who said publicly, this guy's going to please no one. He's not going to please the Conservatives because he's going to be too liberal. And he's not going to please the Liberals because he's not going to deliver. And that's exactly what he's done. And the result is, what is it? Hey, Aloy, make a mess. That was his call to the youth. And goodness knows he's made a mess.
Yeah.
As far as I can see, we're looking at virtual bankruptcy of the Vatican, doctrinal confusion, those ridiculous Masonic-looking crosses being put up now for the Jubilee year.
Yes.
I can't wait for it to end. Maybe that's why. Hopefully, that will be my prediction for next year, that it'll end. Lord save us.
Oh, you are a glass half full guy, aren't you, Mark? You were dreaming of a day when it all comes to an end. I'm not sure it's going to, but okay. You mentioned Cardinal a minute ago. What about Cardinal Radcliff, who has publicly espoused heretical ideas and still gets the red hat? How do you explain that, Mark?
Well, I did a great forensic dive on that. It's obviously, to me anyway, it seems to be obviously a thank you to, it's like paying his dues to Cardinal Cormac Murphy O'Connor. And all these people were in a little set together. So Murphy O'Connor was made a cardinal at the same time as Bergoglio, and they were sat next to each other at the following sort of meetings, consistories, etc. So they had built up a relationship, and then it's widely known that at the time of the conclave, Cormac was a great agitator for Bergoglio. He was going around telling everyone to vote for him. So and this has been reported from several sources, including Cardinal Cormac himself, who's now passed on. So, and he was a great supporter of Radcliffe. And I think that's basically where that's come from. That you can see that he's paid his dues, hasn't he? With the St. Gallen Mafia. He said as well that he's basically, this isn't his own agenda, it's what he's been told to do. So he's setting in place the agenda that was written for him by the St. Gallen Mafia. And, this is just a payoff. I mean, thankfully, Radcliffe can't vote in the conclave. He'll be too old as long as Pope Francis doesn't die in the next few weeks, because he's past the age very early on next year. So that's one positive thing. But it is scandalous that this man's been made a cardinal. But look, when you've got Rupnik running around after what he's done, and when you've got McCarrick being rehabilitated, Pope Francis doesn't care about scandal. He loves it. Look at Zanchetta. Let's not forget Zanchetta. I always think that's the most scandalous episode. Or Grassi. There's a list of them.
You keep bringing things up that I've forgotten all about. Thanks, Mark, for bringing back the nightmare. I appreciate that. Katherine, let's talk about 2025 predictions. How do you see 2025? Right, 2025 playing out in the world, in the church? You got any predictions?
Oh, I don't know. I think I hear what Mark's saying. I think possibly we'll see a new pope by the end of the year. We don't know.
Really?
I think the thing is, really, it seems to me like we are really buying into this idea of comfort. This whatever's comfortable. Again, I would say off the back of COVID, I think there's things being pushed through, and we want to ease people. Let's make everything comfortable. That's behind the assisted suicide stuff. And I think this is where Pope Benedict's words, again, they're always so important to all of us, which is that the world will offer you comfort, but you're not made for comfort. You're made for greatness. So I'm just hopeful that in the year to come, as we're pumped with these things that are designed, they will fail, of course, but we're told the intention is to make things easier, to make you happier, to make you more comfortable. We're going to diversify, and we're going to include, and we're going to take away pain, that people will start to see that there is actually more to their humanness than that. I think some people will be too beholden to it and cling to it like we saw during the COVID years, but I think to be honest with you, Joe, my summary is I think it's going to get a lot darker and a lot worse maybe over the next year, but maybe over the course of 5 to 10 years we'll see a pickup. We're seeing already an increase in the interest in the traditional mass, an increase in pilgrims to Chartres, and of course the response is to quash. And it's a bit like whatever comes out of the Vatican like that, it's a bit like telling a kid, you mustn't look at this website. The first thing they want to do is go and visit that website. So I think the more we're told from Rome, don't do this, this is bad, tradition is bad, let's have rainbow flags and so on, let's bless same-sex couples, let's allow for reception of communion after divorce, and all these things that are coming out, the more I think Catholics are starting to say, well, hang on, why is he interested in quashing this? What's so important about it? So we attend the Latin Mass as often as we can, and there's definitely an increase in interest and in numbers. And one very hopeful thing on a personal level for the year to come is that I brought my very elderly father to the traditional Latin Mass for the first time in his life over Christmas. And he came away, he's a very simple man, he's a builder, he's uneducated. And he said, there's something holier about that. I don't know why. And that was it. He just said, there's something holy. And my stepson, who's in his 20s and has no interest in the faith, who never comes to the Novus Ordo or hasn't for 10 years, said he'd like to come. And he similarly came away and said, I really like that. And he said, I can't tell you why. So both people couldn't articulate why. It wasn't about intelligibility, but it was about something hitting them, some truth, some goodness, and some beauty. So I hope that that's an experience people come to yearn for.
Did you like that video? It's okay. You can admit it. It's perfectly fine. Hey, we cover the big stories of our day, from inside the church to outside the church to all points in between. And we do it from a Catholic perspective. It's called A Catholic Take. It's a radio program Monday through Friday. We live stream it right here on this channel, by the way. So make sure to subscribe, like, and share. We would be very grateful to you. And don't forget, you're going to want to watch this video right here because you don't want to miss anything.